So I want you to picture the scenario. You are sitting in a meeting room, and, maybe it's a physical space, complete with those slightly too bright fluorescent lights humming right above you.
Oh, yeah, casting those terrible long shadows across that fake wood conference table.
Exactly. Or, maybe it's a virtual room, just this sterile grid of faces staring back at you from your screen.
Right, with the ambient noise of a dozen different home offices muted in the background.
Yeah, exactly. And the meeting, well, it has just been dragging on forever. The person running the show has been talking at you for what, 45 minutes straight?
At least, usually clicking through endless slides.
Right. Laying out some new corporate directive or maybe outlining this massive shift in departmental strategy. And then finally, they pause,
The dreaded pause.
they shuffle their notes, they look around the room, or they stare directly into their webcam and they deploy those two universally dreaded words. Any questions?
The shift in the room's atmosphere when those words are spoken, it is almost a physical phenomenon.
Absolutely.
If you measured the collective blood pressure of the attendees in that exact second, you would likely see a measurable spike.
Right.
You can just feel the collective breath holding.
Yeah, it's like this sudden, heavy tension that descends over the whole group. Everyone just freezes, eyes drop to notebooks.
Suddenly, the subtle grain of the conference table is the most fascinating geometric pattern in the entire world.
Seriously. Or, people on a video call miraculously find a reason to vigorously type notes or look intensely at a secondary monitor off camera.
Anything to avoid eye contact.
Right. So welcome to our deep dive today, where we are going to explore the hidden architecture of that specific, agonizing silence.
The very loaded silence.
It really is. Today's source material is this remarkably sharp, incredibly provocative text. It basically strips away the corporate veneer to deconstruct the toxic dynamics behind everyday interactions just like this one.
Yeah, the author of our source text manages to capture this systemic global workplace failure in just a few paragraphs. It's really impressive.
It is. And we are going to use their observations not merely to, critique bad behavior in a specific meeting room.
Right, we're going much bigger than that. We're looking at the sociological and psychological mechanisms that cause organizations to just continuously create, protect, and promote incapable leaders.
Because we have to understand how these daily micro failures ultimately warp our fundamental understanding of leadership itself.
Exactly. We aren't just looking at what makes a bad leader, but why the system demands they exist.
So we are starting right in the trenches today, right in that frozen moment after someone asks any questions.
The trap.
Yeah, the trap.
Yeah.
The author of our source text admits that when they hear that phrase, their default response is silence. And they don't frame this silence as a lack of engagement.
Not at all. It's highly calculated.
They lay out this very specific set of reasons for keeping their mouth shut. First, they point out that attempting to speak often results in just being interrupted halfway through a thought.
Which is incredibly frustrating.
But second, and this is the one that I really want to dissect, they note that legitimate questions are almost always deflected with the phrase, "let's discuss that separately later,"
Ah, yes. The classic deferral tactic.
which, the author notes, never actually happens. The separate discussion is a myth.
It is a fascinating piece of corporate linguistics, honestly.
Oh,
On the surface, it masquerades as respect for the group's time, right?
yeah, like, oh, I'm being so efficient.
Exactly. It's a promise of personalized attention for the individual later on. But underneath, it functions purely as an organizational silencer.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a moment, though. Because, if I'm running a tight 30-minute meeting
Yeah.
and I actually have a packed agenda to get through, isn't deferring a complex question just good time management?
That's the defense, yes.
If someone asks a totally off-topic or hyper-specific question, isn't saying, let's take this offline, the only way to keep the train on the tracks?
In theory, yes.
Aren't we being a bit uncharitable to managers who are, just trying to hit their deliverables?
Well, that is the exact defense the system uses to justify the phrase. And in a healthy environment, where the follow-up actually occurs, your assessment would absolutely hold true.
Right, if they actually follow up.
But our source text is analyzing a toxic environment where the phrase is weaponized. We have to look at the psychological goal of the person running the meeting.
Okay, so what is the real goal then?
If they were genuinely managing time, they would schedule a follow-up immediately. They'd say, let's put 15 minutes on the calendar this afternoon.
But the author points out that the separate discussion never takes place.
Exactly. Therefore, the phrase is not a scheduling tool. It's a conflict avoidance mechanism. The manager is using the appearance of procedural efficiency to neutralize a threat.
A threat to their authority, you mean?
Yes, right in front of an audience. They want to maintain control of the room without actually doing the work of leadership.
Oh, wow. I see the distinction now. It's the corporate equivalent of a parent telling a child, "We'll see," when asked for a toy at the store.
That is a perfect analogy.
The parent knows the answer is no, but "we'll see" prevents a tantrum in the middle of aisle 4, so the manager is just preventing a debate in the middle of the conference room.
A highly accurate comparison. But the author's analysis gets much darker than just avoiding a tantrum.
How so?
The text points out the trap hidden within this dynamic. If you recognize that speaking up leads to deflection or interruption, the logical survival strategy is to remain silent. Right.
Right. You learn how to play the game.
But if you play the game and keep your mouth shut, the meeting leader singles you out. They point directly at you and say, "You've been quiet. What are your thoughts?"
Oh, I hate that. You lose if you don't play because you get singled out.
Exactly. And you lose if you do play because you get interrupted or dismissed.
And when you finally yield to that pressure, I mean, when you drag a question out of your brain just to satisfy their demand, the text states you're immediately told your question is unrelated to the current discussion.
It's maddening.
I am really struggling to square this. If I am the subordinate, I am being punished for speaking, and I am being punished for staying silent. What is the actual psychological mechanism at play here?
You are describing a classic double bind.
A double bind.
Yeah. This is a concept first introduced in the 1950s by anthropologist and systems theorist Gregory Bateson.
Okay, Gregory Bateson.
Right. Bateson originally studied it within the context of family dynamics and schizophrenia, actually. But it applies perfectly to toxic corporate hierarchies.
So what exactly is it?
A double bind is a dilemma in communication where an individual receives two or more conflicting messages, with one message negating the other.
So message 1 is ask a question, I demand participation.
Exactly.
And message 2 is do not ask a question, I will shut you down.
Precisely that. But a true double bind requires a third element, which Bateson called the negative injunction.
Negative injunction. What does that mean in this context?
It means the victim of the double bind cannot simply point out the contradiction or leave the room.
Oh, because they're an employee.
Right. In our scenario, the power dynamic of the manager-employee relationship traps the employee in the room.
They can't just say, you are giving me conflicting instructions and this is a huge waste of my time, without risking their livelihood.
Exactly. They are trapped in a system where no matter what action they take, they fail.
That is brutal. If you are listening to this and you are the person who usually stays quiet in these meetings, ask yourself, are you actually disengaged?
Probably not.
Or have you just efficiently calculated the return on investment of speaking up? Because it sounds like your brain has run the math on the double bind and chosen the path of least resistance.
And the physiological and psychological toll of repeatedly navigating that double bind, I mean, it is profound.
It has to be exhausting.
It is. Which leads us directly into another psychological framework, Martin Seligman's theory of learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness. I've heard of this.
In the late 1960s, Seligman conducted experiments, which were quite controversial later on, where dogs were exposed to unavoidable, unpredictable electrical shocks.
Oh, that's awful.
It was. And eventually the dogs stopped trying to escape. Even when a clear, easy path to safety was introduced, the dogs simply lay down and accepted the shock.
Wait, really? Even when they could just leave?
Yes. Their brains had fundamentally rewired to believe that their actions had no impact on their environment whatsoever.
That is a chilling parallel. The employee who stays silent, who just stares at the grain of the wood table, isn't just bored.
No, they are surviving.
They are the organizational equivalent of Seligman's dogs. They have learned that whether they speak or stay quiet, the social shock is coming regardless.
Exactly.
They've learned that their input has no impact on the trajectory of the project or the behavior of the manager, so their neurology just gives up.
The silence in that room is not peace. It is not consensus. It is a defensive posture.
Wow.
The team has developed learned helplessness. And what makes this so insidious is that the manager interprets this silence as agreement or compliance.
Which only reinforces their belief that they are running an effective meeting.
Precisely. They think they're doing a great job because nobody is arguing with them.
Okay, let's unpack this further. Because if the system is this broken, if speaking up gets you silenced and staying quiet gets you targeted, we have to ask why organizations build these traps in the first place.
It's a structural issue.
Right, who is designing this? Because the author makes a very blunt transition in the text here. They flatly state, I do not consider people like that to be leaders.
A very bold statement.
They draw a massive boundary between holding a title and possessing actual capability.
The author is striking at the core illusion of the modern corporate structure here. We operate under the assumption that hierarchy naturally reflects merit.
But it does.
The text argues that in organizations, titles matter significantly more than actual capability. Individuals are just constantly placed into leadership roles completely, regardless of whether they actually possess the qualities required to lead.
I want to dig heavily into the mechanics of this. We all know the stereotype of the bad boss. It's a massive cultural trope.
Of course.
But why is it so mathematically persistent across every single industry? I mean, if a factory keeps producing defective cars, eventually the factory shuts down or changes its machinery, right?
You would hope so.
But corporations keep producing managers who utilize double binds, and the corporations continue to thrive. Why?
To understand why the factory doesn't shut down, we have to look at the Peter Principle.
The Peter Principle.
Formulated by Dr. Lawrence J. Peter in 1969, the principle states that in any hierarchical organization, an employee will rise through the ranks until they reach their level of incompetence.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. How does that actual mechanism work in practice?
Sure. Imagine you have a brilliant software engineer. I mean, they write flawless code, they solve complex algorithmic problems, and they never miss a deadline.
A total rock star on the team.
Exactly. Because they are highly competent in engineering, the organization wants to reward them.
Makes sense.
But the only culturally accepted reward mechanism that offers significant financial and social elevation is a promotion into management.
So they make the brilliant engineer the manager of engineering.
Correct. But here's the catch. The skills required to write code solitary focus, logical deduction, command line syntax have absolutely zero overlap with the skills required to manage a team.
Right, because managing requires what? Emotional intelligence, conflict resolution?
Active listening, and navigating the highly ambiguous gray areas of the human ego.
So the engineer is now incompetent in their new role.
Completely incompetent. And because they are incompetent, they will not be promoted again. They will remain in that management position indefinitely, just frustrating everyone beneath them.
The organization has successfully extracted a great engineer and replaced them with a terrible manager. That is tragic.
It happens every day.
Now, that explains the origin of the bad manager, but it doesn't quite explain the behavior in the meeting room. I mean, our source text takes a very modern swing at this by bringing up the phenomenon of LinkedIn.
Ah, yes. The social media aspect.
The author notes that people love to like quotes about healthy mindsets online, but that those likes rarely translate into healthier leadership cultures in the real world.
It is an observation that bridges the gap between organizational design and individual psychology perfectly.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I find this dynamic fascinating. Professional social networks are absolutely flooded with leadership platitudes.
Listen to your employees.
Empathy is a superpower.
Yeah.
Leaders eat last. We see millions of engagements on these posts. So I have to ask, are these bad managers entirely lacking in self-awareness?
It's a great question.
Do they genuinely sit at their desks, click like on a post about psychological safety, and then walk into a conference room 10 minutes later and actively deploy a double bind on their team?
Yes, they do.
How do they reconcile that in their own heads? Genuinely believing that liking a quote makes them a good boss.
What's fascinating here is they reconcile it through a mechanism known as moral licensing.
Moral licensing.
Yes. It is much deeper than simple cognitive dissonance or hypocrisy.
Hmm.
Moral licensing is a psychological phenomenon where doing something good gives a person internal subconscious permission to do something bad later on.
Oh, that is wild. Give me a real-world equivalent of that outside the office.
Okay, well, a classic study in behavioral economics found that individuals who recently purchased green, eco-friendly products were actually more likely to cheat on a subsequent unrelated task.
Wait, really? Just because they bought green products?
Yes, they were more likely to steal money from an envelope when they thought nobody was looking, compared to a control group who bought conventional products.
That is insane. Why?
Because purchasing the green product established their identity as a good person. Their moral bank account felt full, so they felt licensed to act selfishly.
So, translating that to the LinkedIn example, the manager reads a post about how true leaders embrace vulnerability. They click like.
Right.
In their brain, they have just performed an act of moral leadership. They have publicly aligned themselves with virtue.
Yes. They have deposited a moral coin in their own psychological bank account.
Oh my God.
So when they walk into the meeting room 10 minutes later, they don't feel the need to actually do the difficult, messy work of listening to a challenging question.
Because they have already established their identity as a good leader online.
Exactly. The like serves as an emotional substitute for actual leadership.
That is staggering. The virtue signaling actually fuels the toxic behavior.
It does.
They feel justified in shutting down the subordinate because, in their mind, they are the hero of the story who just promoted empathy on the internet.
It's a perfect psychological shield.
But surely, the organization's HR department or executive team must see this gap between the online persona and the offline reality.
Well, that assumes the organization has the capacity to measure the offline reality.
Which they don't.
Organizations, particularly massive global enterprises, rely on systems that scale. Human nuance, emotional intelligence, and genuine leadership capability do not scale easily.
So they just don't measure it.
They rely on titles and metrics as artificial proxies for capability because, well, they fit on a spreadsheet.
It goes back to what we can track. I can easily track if a manager's department hit its quarterly revenue target.
Easily.
I cannot easily track if that manager crushed the creative spirit of 3 junior designers in a Tuesday status meeting to achieve that target.
Exactly. The system defaults to the measurable. The tragedy of the corporate structure is that it rewards the title and the visible metrics, while the team suffers the invisible reality of the leader's incompetence.
It's a complete blind spot for the organization.
The organization demands that the manager hold the meeting, so the manager holds the meeting. The organization demands that the manager solicit feedback, so the manager asks any questions.
But it's all fake.
Yes. The manager is simply executing a performative script designed to satisfy the spreadsheet, not the humans in the room.
Okay, so if we accept that this artificially assigned, title-based leadership is fundamentally broken, that it relies on the Peter principle to promote the wrong people, and moral licensing to justify their bad behavior, what is the way out?
We need an alternative.
Right. And the source text doesn't just offer a critique, it offers a genuinely radical alternative. The author boldly declares that if an organization lacks someone with genuine leadership qualities, it is actually better to have no leader at all.
It is a statement that makes traditional management theorists incredibly uncomfortable.
I bet.
The foundational assumption of modern corporate design is that a bad leader is still better than a vacuum. The belief is that without a designated node in the hierarchy, a team will instantly devolve into chaos, infighting, and total paralysis.
But the author argues the exact opposite. They state that in the total absence of an artificially assigned leader, real leadership naturally emerges straight from within the environment itself.
It's a concept known as emergent leadership.
I want to unpack the mechanics of this emergent leadership. Let's take it out of the fluorescent lit conference room for a second. Imagine a group of strangers on a subway car.
Okay.
Suddenly, the train grinds to a halt in the middle of a dark tunnel. The power goes out. Smoke starts filtering in.
A very high-stakes, unscripted environment.
Exactly. Nobody in that car is wearing a badge that says Subway Evacuation Manager.
Right. Human resources did not assign a hierarchy before everyone boarded.
But it isn't pure chaos for long. Almost immediately, someone naturally steps up. Maybe it is someone who happens to have a flashlight.
Or maybe it is someone whose voice naturally projects calm in a crisis.
Exactly. Maybe it is an off-duty mechanic who understands how to manually pry the doors open. The environment dictates the leader based purely on the immediate needs of the situation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are illustrating the sociological concept of spontaneous order.
Spontaneous order.
Yes. In any group dynamic where there is a shared objective, in your example, survival and escape, and a complete absence of imposed hierarchy, the group will organically self-organize.
Because they have to.
And the most fascinating aspect of emergent leadership is its fluidity.
Fluidity meaning the leader changes.
Entirely. The person who has the physical strength and mechanical knowledge to pry the subway doors open is the emergent leader for that specific 5-minute window.
Right, because they are the most capable in that moment.
But once the doors are open, and the group has to navigate the dark, uneven tracks while keeping a panicked passenger calm, the physical strength is no longer the primary requirement.
So what happens?
Empathy and calm communication become paramount. The mechanic naturally recedes into the group, and a different individual, perhaps a nurse or a teacher who is skilled at de-escalation, steps forward to become the new emergent leader.
The leadership shifts dynamically as the environment shifts. That is brilliant.
Yes, compare that to the corporate structure. Artificial leadership remains static.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
The organization forces a single person who gained their title 3 years ago for an entirely different skill set to try and manage every shifting dynamic, every new technology, and every interpersonal conflict.
It is bound to fail.
It is not just that it fails. It actively destroys the alternative. We need to look at how artificially assigned leaders function as blockages.
Blockages.
Yes. The author's point about having no leader at all is crucial because the presence of the bad leader actually prevents the mechanic or the nurse from stepping up.
Let's explore that metaphor. How does the bad manager block the talent?
Think of the artificial leader as an apex predator that has entirely lost its teeth and its ability to hunt.
Okay, a toothless predator.
But its scent still completely saturates the territory. The title is the scent. It creates a dead zone.
Wow.
The predator cannot feed the pack, but its presence terrifies any other capable hunter from stepping into the clearing to do the job.
Because if a subordinate, let's say a highly capable junior strategist, steps up and naturally begins organizing the team to solve a complex problem, the incompetent manager views that not as a victory for the team,
But as a direct threat to their authority.
the manager's ego and their precarious grasp on their artificial status compel them to crush the emergent leader.
This brings us right back to the meeting room.
It does.
When the junior strategist asks a brilliant, probing question that the manager cannot answer, the manager deploys the "let's discuss that separately later" deflection.
They are actively neutralizing the emergent leader to protect their own scent in the territory.
Exactly. They are keeping the capable hunter out of the clearing.
That reframes the entire concept of the leadership vacuum. We're taught to fear the vacuum. But the author is telling us that the vacuum isn't chaos, it is highly fertile ground.
It's necessary for growth.
By removing the toothless apex predator, you clear the scent. You allow the group to assess its own needs, and for the most capable person in that specific contextual moment to rise organically.
The environment dictates the leader, not the HR department.
It makes you wonder how much immense human potential is being suffocated every single day across the global economy simply because someone has the word director in their email signature.
The economic and innovative loss is, frankly, incalculable.
It really is.
But the source text pushes us to look beyond just the immediate loss of productivity or the frustration of a single project.
Right. We are moving to the final and undoubtedly the most severe consequence outlined in our material.
The long-term effects.
The generational damage. This isn't just about one bad meeting or an annoying boss. The author states that when organizations continuously force leadership positions onto the wrong people, it creates a massive trickle-down effect.
The ultimate casualty is the organizational culture itself.
The ultimate casualties are the subordinates themselves, because they grow up fundamentally misunderstanding what leadership actually is.
This touches on the very foundation of how culture is transmitted. It requires us to abandon the idea that corporate culture is dictated by HR initiatives or mission statements.
But we always hear about company culture. I mean, every startup has a page on their website dedicated to their amazing culture.
Yep.
It usually features, photos of ping pong tables, a list of core values like integrity and boldness, and quotes about transparency.
That is marketing, not culture.
So what is the actual culture?
To understand the generational damage the author is warning about, we have to look at Albert Bandura's social learning theory.
Bandura.
Bandura demonstrated that humans are fundamentally observational learners. We do not learn how to behave in an environment by reading the rule book.
We learn by watching.
Yes, we learn by watching the models of power around us and observing what behaviors are actually rewarded and punished. Culture is simply the sum total of the behavior that is modeled and tolerated by the organization.
So what does this all mean? If I am a 22-year-old junior employee, fresh out of college, sitting in my first real corporate job, I am essentially a sponge.
You are meticulously tracking the power dynamics.
I'm watching the room to figure out how to survive.
Exactly. When that 22-year-old sits in the meeting room we described at the beginning of this deep dive, they watch their manager deploy the double bind.
They watch their manager shut down a colleague's question with a performative deferral.
And most importantly, they look at the organizational chart and see that this manager is highly compensated and holds a prestigious title.
Oh, man. The lesson the young employee learns isn't just my boss is a jerk.
No, it's much deeper than that.
The lesson they internalize is This is how a boss is supposed to act. They're learning the rules of the rigged game.
This raises an important question about how entire mental models are formed. The mental model of leadership becomes deeply and permanently warped for that young employee.
How so? What do they think leadership is now?
They learn that vulnerability, active listening, and empowering others are not just unnecessary. They are actively dangerous to one's career trajectory.
Because those traits get you marginalized.
Exactly. Conversely, they learn that performative control, deflecting accountability, and managing upward while crushing downward are the exact mechanisms of success. They learn to chase the title rather than develop the capability.
It operates exactly like a virus. It infects the host, rewrites the DNA of what the host believes leadership to be, and then uses that host to replicate itself.
A perfect analogy.
Because 10 years later, that 22-year-old gets promoted, they acquire the title, and what do?
They simply deploy the toxic behaviors they absorbed a decade earlier.
They become the new, toothless apex predator, stifling the next generation of emergent talent beneath them. The cycle of toxic artificial leadership continues into the future.
The generational damage is that the very definition of leadership is corrupted.
That is terrifying.
Organizations lose the ability to self-correct because the people rising into power lack the vocabulary and the conceptual framework to even recognize what true leadership looks like.
They believe the artificial performative dominance, IS, the genuine article.
They don't realize they are merely executing a script passed down by a broken system.
That is an incredibly heavy realization. It takes that tiny, seemingly innocuous moment, a single dismissal of a question in a Tuesday morning status meeting, and reveals it to be a microscopic building block of a massive destructive cycle that spans decades.
It makes you realize the profound weight of everyday interactions.
It really does. It demands that anyone occupying a position of influence, whether in a corporation, a classroom, or a family, recognize that their behavior is constantly being observed.
You are always writing the unspoken rules for the next generation.
If you rely on artificial authority to silence inquiry, you are actively degrading the future capability of your entire community.
Absolutely. The source text serves as a vital diagnostic tool in that regard.
We have ventured deep into the machinery of human behavior today. To synthesize the immense ground we have covered for you, the listener, we started with the physiological tension of the phrase, "Any questions?"
Unmasking the trap of the double bind.
Right, and the learned helplessness it instills. We dismantled the illusion of artificial titles using the Peter Principle and explored how moral licensing allows bad managers to use LinkedIn as a shield for their incompetence.
Then we examined the sociology of emergent leadership.
Proving that a leadership vacuum is actually fertile ground for natural capability to rise. And finally, we confronted the viral nature of toxic culture, where the very definition of leadership is warped for the next generation through observational learning.
It strips away the comforting illusions of hierarchy and forces us to look at the raw mechanics of how power is actually wielded.
And the damage it causes when it is disconnected from capability. It forces a reckoning. Which brings me to the final provocative thought I want to leave with you, the listener, to mull over on your own.
It's a great thought experiment.
It builds directly on the sociology of emergent leadership we discussed today. I want you to think about the groups, the teams, or the communities you are a part of right now.
It could be your department at work, a volunteer organization, a local committee.
Or even the dynamic within your own extended family. Imagine that at midnight tonight, a virus wipes out all organizational charts. All official titles, all badges, all assigned roles, and all salaries are completely erased today.
A total reset.
Tomorrow morning, the hierarchy is gone, but the group still has to accomplish its goals. Look around that group. Who would the group naturally turn to for direction tomorrow?
Whose voice would naturally carry weight based purely on their competence, their empathy, and their track record of genuine problem solving.
And the much harder, more important question, if your own title, whatever it may be, was stripped away in the night, when the sun comes up, would anyone still choose to follow you?
A profound measure of one's true value to a community, stripped of all artificial subsidies.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep exploration. We hope it provides a new lens through which to view your next team interaction, and perhaps the courage to challenge the rigged games when you see them. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening.